I promise to pay when I grow up. The words hung in the air like a prayer, and the Sterling corner market fell silent. The hum of refrigerators seemed to grow louder in the sudden quiet, while shoppers froze mid-reach for products they didn't really need. 7-year-old Keisha Williams stood before the tall man in the expensive suit, her small hand pressed against her rumbling stomach, unaware that she'd just spoken the sentence that would change 2 lives forever. David Sterling looked down at the child, his phone forgotten in his manicured hand. She was so thin her shoulder blades showed through her worn pink t-shirt, and her sneakers had holes that someone had tried to patch with duct tape. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, old eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen too much hunger, too much disappointment. "What did you say?" he asked, though he'd heard every word perfectly. Keisha's chin trembled, but she lifted it higher. "I asked if I could please have some milk. Just a small carton. I don't have money right now, but I'm very good at remembering promises, and I'll pay you back when I get a job." The woman behind the deli counter had stopped slicing ham. A businessman reading pasta labels turned to stare. Even the teenager stocking shelves near the entrance had paused, a box of cereal halfway to its destination. David had walked into this market 1,000 times, grabbing coffee and energy bars between meetings, never really seeing the people around him. Now he couldn't look away from this little girl who spoke of debts and jobs with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age. "How old are you?" he heard himself ask. 7. "But I'll be 8 in October, and Mama says 8 is old enough for responsibility." Something twisted in David's chest. He'd been 8 once, standing in a different store, watching his own mother count and recount crumpled bills, putting items back on shelves when the numbers didn't add up. "Where's your mother now?" "Working. She has 3 jobs." Keisha said it like it was normal, like every child's mother worked from dawn to midnight just to keep a roof over their heads. "She cleans the diner on 5th Street in the mornings, then she does offices downtown, and at night she stocks shelves at the pharmacy. She works real hard, but sometimes there's still not enough left over." The silence stretched longer. David could feel eyes on him, other customers waiting to see what the man in the $1,000 suit would do when confronted with such raw need. "What's your name?" he asked. "Keisha Williams. I live on Maple Street, but I got lost." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I was following a cat because it looked hungry too, and I thought maybe we could help each other, but then I couldn't find my way home." David Sterling, tech mogul, millionaire, man who'd built an empire from nothing, found himself reaching for a shopping cart. The metal felt cold under his hands as he pulled it free from the stack. "Come on, Keisha Williams. Let's get you that milk." But he didn't stop at milk. His hands moved with purpose, adding bread, peanut butter, bananas, cheese, eggs. Items that would last, items that would matter. "Mr. Sterling," Keisha's eyes grew wide as the cart filled. "I can't pay for all this. I only asked for milk." "I know." He added pasta, sauce, cereal. "Tell me about your favorite food." "I don't really have one. We eat whatever's cheapest." She paused, watching him add apples to the growing pile. "But I've always wondered about strawberries. They look like little hearts." Without hesitation, he grabbed 2 containers of the organic ones. By now, a small crowd had gathered. The deli worker had abandoned her station completely. A woman with expensive purse clutched her designer water bottle, staring. An elderly man near the pharmacy counter shook his head, though whether in disapproval or amazement, David couldn't tell. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Keisha asked as they moved toward the checkout. David paused, a carton of orange juice in his hand. Why was he? He'd built his fortune by being practical, calculating, never letting emotion cloud his judgment. But looking at this child, this serious little girl who promised to pay debts she couldn't possibly understand, something had cracked open inside him. "Because someone should be," he said simply. The teenage cashier with purple-streaked hair rang up each item with unusual care, her eyes darting between David and Keisha as if she was witnessing something important but couldn't quite name what it was. "Are you rich?" Keisha asked, watching the numbers climb on the register display. "Yes." "That must be nice." David almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sometimes." The total appeared, $247.83. David pulled out his black card without blinking, but Keisha was staring at the number with something close to horror. "That's so much money," she whispered. "I'll never be able to pay you back." "Keisha." David knelt down so they were eye level. "Some debts aren't meant to be repaid. They're meant to be passed forward." She studied his face with those two old eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means when you grow up and become successful, and you'll help someone else who needs it." The bags multiplied on the counter, filled with more food than Keisha had seen in months. Around them, the store had returned to its normal rhythms, but David could feel the lingering attention, the whispered conversations. "Mr. Sterling," Keisha said as he gathered the bags, "I think you might be the nicest person I've ever met." He looked down at her, this child who'd wandered into his carefully ordered world and turned it upside down with 5 simple words. In her face, he saw possibility. In her eyes, he saw hope that hadn't yet learned to die. "We'll see about that," he said, and meant it. The silence in David's Mercedes was broken only by Keisha's soft directions and the rustle of grocery bags in the back seat. "Turn left at the stop sign," she said, her small voice almost swallowed by the luxury car's whisper-quiet interior. "Then straight until you see the building with the broken streetlight." David had driven through Riverside District 1,000 times, but he'd never really seen it. Now, following Keisha's directions into the heart of the neighborhood, he noticed the cracked sidewalks, the chain-link fences, the weeds growing through concrete. The contrast to his penthouse 20 minutes away felt like traveling to another world. "That's it," Keisha pointed to a 3-story brick building that had seen better decades. Paint peeled from window frames, and a rusty fire escape zigzagged up the front like a scar. "We're on the 2nd floor." David parked and helped Keisha gather the bags, ignoring the stares from a group of teenagers loitering near the building's entrance. One of them, a boy with a Lakers jersey and suspicious eyes, watched David's every move. "You sure about this, little girl?" the boy called out. "Mama Carmen don't like strangers." "Marcus, mind your business," Keisha shot back, but David caught the protective tone in the teenager's voice. Someone was looking out for her, which mattered more than he'd expected. The stairwell smelled of disinfectant and desperation, but it was clean. Someone cared about this place, even if they couldn't afford to make it beautiful. David followed Keisha up worn steps, the grocery bags heavier with each flight, though not from their weight. "Mama," Keisha called as she pushed open apartment 2B. "I'm home, and I brought someone." The apartment was tiny but spotless. Mismatched furniture that had been loved into submission, walls decorated with Keisha's artwork and certificates from school. A cross hung above a small television, and everything had been arranged with the kind of care that made the most of very little. Carmen Williams emerged from what David assumed was the bedroom, still in her white waitress uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived twice that long. Those eyes narrowed when they landed on David. "Keisha Marie Williams, where have you been?" Carmen's voice carried the sharp edge of fear disguised as anger. "I told you never to leave this building without telling Mrs. Rodriguez. I got lost following a cat, Mama, but Mr. Sterling helped me, and look," Keisha gestured toward the bags David carried. "He bought us groceries. Lots of them. Even strawberries." Carmen's gaze shifted to David, taking in his expensive suit, his polished shoes, his presence in her carefully protected world. "I don't know what my daughter told you, Mr. Sterling." David Sterling. He set the bags on her small kitchen counter. "She asked me for milk and promised to pay me back when she grew up. I thought she might need more than milk. We don't take charity." Carmen's chin lifted in a gesture so similar to her daughter's that David nearly smiled. "It's not charity. It's groceries." David began unpacking the bags, noting how Carmen's eyes lingered on each item. "Keisha seems like a remarkable little girl. Polite, honest, responsible. You should be proud." "I am proud." Carmen moved to intercept him, her hands brushing his as she took control of her own kitchen. "But we don't need." "Mama, he bought strawberries," Keisha interrupted, pulling out one of the containers like she'd discovered treasure. Real ones. They're even redder than I imagined. Carmen looked at her daughter's face, bright with a joy Carmen couldn't remember seeing lately, and something shifted in her expression. "Thank you," she said quietly to David. "But this is too much. I can't." "Let me ask you something," David said, leaning against her counter like he belonged there. "If you found a child who needed help, what would you do?" "Help them," Carmen answered without hesitation. "Then let me help yours." The simple words hung between them, and David watched Carmen wrestle with pride and practicality. He understood the battle. He'd fought it himself once, in a different life. "Why?" Carmen asked finally. "You don't know us. We're nobody to you." David was quiet for a long moment, watching Keisha examine each grocery item like she was memorizing them. "She reminds me of someone," he said. 3 weeks later, David found himself sitting at Carmen's small kitchen table, helping Keisha with her math homework while Carmen got ready for her night shift at the pharmacy. It had become routine, David stopping by after work, bringing groceries, staying for dinner, helping with homework. If Tommy has 12 apples and gives away 4, how many does he have left? David read from Keisha's workbook. 8, Keisha said confidently. But why would Tommy give away 4 apples? Doesn't he know how much they cost? David laughed, and Carmen looked up from where she was pinning her hair back for work. She'd grown comfortable with his presence, this wealthy man who sat in her kitchen like he'd always belonged there. "Mr. David," Keisha said, using the name she'd settled on for him, "will you read to me tonight? Mama has to work, and Mrs. Rodriguez falls asleep during the good parts." "Keisha, you can't keep asking Mr. Sterling to babysit," Carmen said, but there was no real heat in her voice. She'd learned to trust him, though she couldn't explain why. "I don't mind," David said. "What are we reading?" "Charlotte's Web. It's about a pig and a spider who become friends even though they're different." Carmen caught David's eye and smiled, a real smile, not the polite one she'd given him those first weeks. "I'll be back by midnight," she said, kissing Keisha's forehead. "Be good for Mr. David." After Carmen left, David settled on the small couch with Keisha curled beside him, the worn book open between them. But before he could start reading, Keisha looked up at him with those serious eyes. "Mr. David, why don't you have any kids?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think I don't?" "Because you wouldn't spend so much time with me if you had your own." David was quiet for a moment, then closed the book. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Emily. Where is she now?" "She died when she was 8. Cancer." Keisha processed this with the matter-of-fact acceptance children have for life's cruelties. "Is that why you help us?" "Because I'm almost 8. "Maybe," David admitted. "Does that bother you?" Keisha shook her head. "I think it's nice. Emily must have been very special for you to still love her so much." Outside in the hallway, Mrs. Rodriguez pressed her ear against the door, then shuffled back to her own apartment where 3 other neighbors waited. "He's reading to her again," Mrs. Rodriguez reported in Spanish. "Been here every night this week." "Rich men don't just help poor families," muttered Mr. Vasquez from 2C. "There's always an angle." "Carmen's too trusting," added Lisa from upstairs. "Pretty woman like her, working all the time, desperate for help with that little girl. Men like him, they see opportunity." "Maybe he's just being kind," Mrs. Rodriguez suggested, but even she sounded uncertain. "Nobody's that kind without wanting something back," Mr. Vasquez said darkly. "Mark my words, that man's got plans for Carmen or that little girl, and neither of them's gonna be good." The whispers followed Carmen to work, trailed her home from the grocery store, shadowed her in the laundry room. Neighbors who'd been friendly grew distant, their eyes full of warnings she didn't want to hear. But when she came home each night to find David helping Keisha with homework, or reading her stories, or just listening to her chatter about her day, Carmen couldn't reconcile the man she saw with the predator her neighbors imagined. Still, the whispers planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger each day. One evening, as David prepared to leave after dinner, Carmen walked him to the door. "David," she said quietly, "people are talking." "I know." He'd felt the hostile stares, heard the conversations that stopped when he passed. They think you want something from us. David looked back at Keisha, who was arranging her school papers for the next day with the precision of a tiny adult. Do you think that? Carmen studied his face, this man who'd become part of their small world so naturally she sometimes forgot he didn't belong there. No, she said finally. But I need to know why you're really here. Not the story about Keisha reminding you of someone. The real reason. David was quiet for a long moment, his hand on the doorknob. Emily loved strawberries too, he said. She used to say they looked like little hearts. Carmen felt something shift inside her chest. David. She was diagnosed when she was 6. We had 2 years, good years, mostly. But toward the end, when she was too sick to eat much, strawberries were the only thing she wanted. His voice grew softer. The day she died, I promised her I'd never stop seeing the magic in little things. In strawberries that look like hearts. In children who promise to pay debts when they grow up. Carmen reached out without thinking, her hand covering his. I'm sorry. So am I. David met her eyes. But Keisha, she brought Emily back to me. Not the sadness, but the joy. The wonder. I'd forgotten what it felt like to see the world through a child's eyes. And that's enough? That's all you want? David smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked truly peaceful. That's everything, Carmen. That's enough. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. 3 years earlier. Rain drummed against the hospital windows as David Sterling sat in the hard plastic chair, his 3-year-old daughter Maya curled in his lap. Her dark curls, so much like her mother's, tickled his chin as she slept, exhausted from another round of chemotherapy. Daddy, Maya whispered without opening her eyes, when I get better, can we get strawberries? The kind that look like hearts. Of course, baby girl. David's voice caught. As many as you want. But Maya never got better. The car accident happened on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after her cancer went into remission. David had been driving her to preschool when the drunk driver ran the red light. Maya died instantly. David walked away without a scratch. Natasha left 3 weeks after the funeral. I can't look at you without seeing her, she'd said, her own grief making her cruel. You were her whole world, and now she's gone, and I just can't. The memory always ended the same way, with David sitting alone in their empty house, surrounded by Maya's toys and clothes and dreams, wondering how the universe could be so carelessly brutal. Present day. You're spending too much time there, Markuschan said, not looking up from the quarterly reports spread across his desk. As David's business partner and oldest friend, Marcus had earned the right to speak truths others wouldn't dare voice. David stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their downtown office, watching the city sprawl below. I'm helping a child with her homework, Marcus. Since when is that a crime? Since it became your entire life. Marcus finally looked up, his expression serious. You've missed 3 board meetings this month. You left a conference call with Tokyo investors because Keisha had a school play. Your assistant told me you've been researching elementary schools in Riverside District. She's brilliant, Marcus. With the right education. She's not Maya. The words hit David like a physical blow. He turned from the window, his jaw tight. Don't. Someone has to say it. Marcus stood and walked around his desk. I watched you fall apart when Maya died. I watched you rebuild yourself piece by piece. But this isn't healing, David. This is replacement. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you've spent more on that family in 2 months than most people make in a year. I know you bought Keisha a bike that costs more than her mother makes in a month. I know you've been to every parent-teacher conference even though you're not her parent. Marcus's voice softened. I know you love that little girl, but she's not yours to save. David was quiet for a long moment, the weight of Marcus's words settling over him like a familiar blanket of guilt. Maya would have been 8 next month, he said finally. I know. She would have been reading chapter books and learning multiplication and arguing about bedtimes. David's voice grew quieter. She would have been exactly like Keisha. But she's not Keisha. And Keisha isn't her. David turned back to the window, but now he saw only ghosts in the glass reflection. What if I can't stop? Then you need help. Professional help. Because what you're doing, it's going to hurt that little girl and her mother. And it's going to destroy what's left of you. Keisha Williams had never been prouder of anything in her 7 years of life than the gold star sticker on her math test. She clutched the paper to her chest as she raced up the stairs to apartment 2B, bursting through the door with enough energy to power the building. Mama. Mr. David. Look what I got. Carmen looked up from where she was folding laundry on the couch, and David emerged from the kitchen where he'd been helping prepare dinner. The sight of Keisha's beaming face made them both smile. 100%. Keisha announced, waving the test paper like a flag. Mrs. Patterson said I had the highest score in the whole class, and she wants to recommend me for the gifted program. David swept her up in a hug, spinning her around the small living room. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You worked so hard for this. Carmen watched them together, and for a moment, the picture looked so natural, so right, that she could almost forget David wasn't really part of their family. Almost. We should celebrate, David said, setting Keisha down. What would you like to do? Can we go to the bookstore? The big one downtown? I want to pick out my own chapter book. Of course. Carmen, would you like to come with us? Carmen hesitated. She had to work her evening shift at the diner, but more than that, something about David's eagerness, the way his whole face lit up at Keisha's success, made her uneasy in a way she couldn't name. I have to work, she said. But you two go ahead. After they left, Carmen sat alone in her quiet apartment, staring at the laptop David had given them for Keisha's schoolwork. She'd been meaning to look something up for days, ever since Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned seeing David's picture in an old newspaper at the library. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before she typed, David Sterling daughter death. The search results made her stomach drop. Tech mogul's daughter dies in tragic accident. Sterling Industries CEO takes leave after child's death. David Sterling hospitalized following daughter's funeral. Carmen clicked on the first article, her hand shaking as she read about Maya Sterling, a 3-year-old girl with dark curls and bright eyes who died in a car accident 3 years ago. The photos showed David at the hospital, David at the funeral, David being led away from the cemetery by security after trying to throw dirt on his own child's grave. But it was the last article that made Carmen's blood run cold. Sterling's ex-wife speaks out. He can't accept she's gone. Natasha Williams Sterling, the biracial mother of deceased toddler Maya Sterling, broke her silence this week about her former husband's inability to cope with their daughter's death. David has been obsessed with finding another little girl who reminds him of Maya, Williams Sterling told reporters. He's been donating to children's charities, volunteering at schools, even following families with mixed-race daughters at playgrounds. I had to get a restraining order because he kept showing up at Maya's grave with toys and talking to her like she was still alive. He needs help, not enablement. Carmen's laptop slipped from her numb fingers. Maya Sterling. Not Emily. He'd lied about everything, his daughter's name, how she died, even her age. And the ex-wife's maiden name. Williams. The front door opened and Keisha's laughter filled the apartment. Mama, look what Mr. David bought me. 3 whole books, and he said we can start a library in my room. Carmen looked up to see David and Keisha laden with shopping bags, both of them glowing with happiness. David's eyes met hers across the room, and his smile faltered. Carmen, are you all right? She was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. This man who'd lied his way into their lives, who bought her daughter gifts and helped with homework and read bedtime stories. This man who'd been using Keisha to replace his dead child. Keisha, honey, go put your books in your room, Carmen said, her voice carefully controlled. But I want to show you. Now, baby. Something in her mother's tone made Keisha obey without argument, though she shot worried glances between the adults as she gathered her new treasures. David set down his shopping bag slowly, his eyes never leaving Carmen's face. What's wrong? Maya, Carmen said quietly. Not Emily. Maya. The color drained from David's face. She died in a car accident, not from cancer. She was 3, not 8. And her mother, your ex-wife, her maiden name was Williams. Carmen stood up, the laptop sliding to the floor. Just like ours. David opened his mouth, but no words came. The careful story he'd constructed crumbled around him like a house of cards. You picked us, Carmen whispered, the full horror of it dawning on her. You didn't just happen to meet Keisha in that store. You've been looking for us. For a little black girl who could replace your daughter. Carmen, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to us for months? That you're using my daughter to play out some sick fantasy where your child didn't die? Carmen's voice rose, and she forced herself to lower it, mindful of Keisha in the next room. That article said you followed families. Families like ours. It's not like that, David said desperately. I love Keisha. I love both of you. What we have, it's real. What we have is built on lies. Carmen walked to the door and opened it. I want you to leave. Carmen. Leave. And don't come back. David looked toward Keisha's room, where they could hear her arranging her new books, humming to herself. She's going to ask where I went. I'll tell her the truth. That some people aren't built for staying. Carmen's voice broke on the last word. Just like her father. David stood frozen for a moment, then walked slowly toward the door. As he passed Carmen, he stopped. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly. Either of you. But you did, Carmen replied. You hurt us both. Because you made Keisha love you, and you made me trust you, and now we have to live with the fact that none of it was real. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Carmen sank against it, tears streaming down her face. In the next room, Keisha was still humming, still arranging her books, still believing in the kindness of a man who just disappeared from her life. Carmen pressed her hands to her mouth to muffle her sobs. She'd known it was too good to be true. Men like David Sterling didn't just help families like theirs out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price, always a catch, always a reason that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with something else. The humming stopped. Mama! Keisha's small voice called from her room. Is Mr. David still here? I want to show him how I organized my new library. Carmen closed her eyes and tried to figure out how to break her daughter's heart. For 3 days, Keisha asked the same question every morning. When is Mr. David coming back? Carmen's answer never changed. I don't know, baby. But on the 4th morning, as she watched her daughter stare out the window with the patient hope of a child who still believed in miracles, Carmen knew she couldn't keep lying. Not when Keisha had stopped eating the strawberries in their refrigerator, saying they didn't taste like hearts anymore. The knock on the door came just as Carmen was gathering courage to call David. She opened it expecting Mrs. Rodriguez, but found David Sterling instead, looking like he hadn't slept since she'd thrown him out. Please, he said before she could speak. Give me 5 minutes. Carmen glanced back at Keisha, who was suddenly alert in her chair, hope blazing across her small face. Mr. David. Stay there, Keisha, Carmen said firmly. She stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. You shouldn't be here. I know. But I can't stop thinking about what you said. About Maya. David's hands shook as he ran them through his hair. You were right. I did pick you. The admission hit Carmen like a physical blow, even though she'd known it was true. I saw Keisha through the market window 3 weeks before she ever came inside, David continued. She was pressed against the glass, watching people buy food, and something about her expression, the longing, the resignation, it was exactly how Maya used to look when she was too sick to eat but still wanted to be part of family dinners. Carmen wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm hallway. I started going to that market every day, hoping she'd come back. When she finally walked in and asked for milk, David's voice broke. It felt like Maya had sent her to me. Like I was getting a second chance. A second chance at what, David? She's not your daughter. At being a father again. at protecting someone small and precious, at feeling like I mattered to someone who needed me. Tears rolled down his face unchecked. Maya died because I couldn't keep her safe. I was supposed to protect her, and I failed. But with Keisha. Keisha isn't your redemption, Carmen said quietly. She's a little girl who needs stability, not someone else's broken dreams projected onto her life. David nodded miserably. I know. Marcus keeps telling me the same thing. That I'm using Keisha to avoid dealing with my grief. Are you? Yes. The word came out as a whisper. God help me, yes. But Carmen, what I feel for her, for both of you, it's real. It may have started as something twisted, but it became love. Real love. Carmen studied his face, seeing the truth there alongside the pain. That doesn't make it right. I know. That's why I made an appointment. David pulled a business card from his pocket. Dr. Sarah Chen. She specializes in grief counseling. I start seeing her tomorrow. Carmen took the card, surprised by the gesture. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to earn the right to be in Keisha's life again. The right way this time. With honesty and professional help and whatever it takes to prove I'm not just using her to fill a hole that Maya left behind. Before Carmen could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Unknown number. Carmen Williams. The woman's voice was crisp, professional, with an edge that made Carmen's stomach tighten. Yes. This is Victoria Sterling. I believe you know my ex-husband. Carmen's eyes flew to David, who had gone pale. Don't hang up. We need to talk. About David. About what he's doing to your family. I don't understand. He's sick, Carmen. My husband, ex-husband, is mentally ill. He's been obsessed with replacing our daughter since she died, and now he's fixated on yours. I'm calling to warn you. Carmen looked at David, who was shaking his head frantically. Mrs. Sterling. It's Dr. Sterling now. I'm a psychiatrist, Carmen. I know the signs of unhealthy attachment, and David has exhibited them before. After Maya died, he stalked other families. Mixed-race families, specifically. Families that looked like ours. Victoria's voice grew colder. He's not helping you out of kindness. He's using you to play house, to pretend he still has a family. That's not, isn't it? How much money has he spent on you? How involved has he become in your daughter's life? How quickly did he insert himself into your daily routine? Carmen felt sick. Everything Victoria described fit perfectly. I'm not trying to hurt you, Victoria continued, but I won't let David destroy another family the way he destroyed ours. If he doesn't voluntarily remove himself from your lives, I'll be forced to take legal action. The line went dead. Carmen stared at the phone, then at David. Your ex-wife is a psychiatrist. Yes. And she thinks you're mentally ill. Victoria thinks a lot of things. David's voice was tight. She also thinks grief has a timeline and that loving someone new means betraying someone dead. She said you stalked other families. David closed his eyes. After Maya died, I went to playgrounds sometimes. Parks where children played. I told myself I was just remembering her, but Victoria was right. I was looking for her. Looking for another little girl who could help me feel like Maya was still alive. Oh, David. But I never approached anyone before Keisha. Never spoke to another family. Never got involved in their lives. Keisha was different. Because she looked like Maya? Because she needed help, and I needed to help someone. David met her eyes. I know how that sounds. I know it's not healthy. That's why I'm going to therapy. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Victoria mentioned legal action. She can't do anything. I haven't broken any laws. What about child services? David's expression darkened. What about them? If she reports you, reports us, what happens then? Before David could answer, Carmen's phone rang again. This time the caller ID read, Department of Children and Family Services. Ms. Williams? This is Janet Torres, a social worker with DCFS. I need to schedule a home visit to discuss your family's relationship with David Sterling. Carmen's knees nearly buckled. A home visit? We've received concerns about Mr. Sterling's involvement with your daughter. I'd like to speak with you and assess the situation. Would tomorrow afternoon work? What kind of concerns? I'd prefer to discuss that in person. Is 2 o'clock convenient? Carmen looked at David, who was listening to every word with growing alarm. I suppose. Excellent. I'll see you then. The phone went dead again, and Carmen sank against the wall. She reported us, David said quietly. Victoria reported us to Child Services. What does that mean? What happens now? It means they're going to investigate whether I'm a threat to Keisha, whether you're an unfit mother for allowing me around her. David's voice was hollow. It means Victoria might get exactly what she wants, me out of your lives permanently. Inside the apartment, they could hear Keisha's small voice. Mama? Is everything okay? You're talking really loud. Carmen pressed her hands to her face. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry was explaining to Keisha why David had stopped coming around. Now she was facing a child services investigation that could tear apart what little stability they'd built. We need to tell her, Carmen said. Before the social worker comes tomorrow, Keisha needs to know what's happening. What are you going to say? Carmen looked at David, this broken man who'd stumbled into their lives carrying his own daughter's ghost, this stranger who'd become family before she'd learned he wasn't who he claimed to be. I'm going to tell her the truth, she said. That sometimes adults make mistakes when they're hurting. That loving someone doesn't always mean knowing how to show it the right way. And about the social worker? I'll tell her that sometimes when adults are worried about children, they send special people to make sure everything is okay. Carmen's voice grew stronger. And I'll tell her that no matter what happens, she's safe with me. Carmen. You need to leave, David. Before the social worker comes tomorrow, before this gets any worse. Keisha can't see you like this, and I can't have her caught in the middle of whatever battle Victoria is planning. David nodded, though the gesture looked like it cost him everything. Will you tell her? I'll tell her you had to go away for a while to get help. That you care about her very much, but sometimes caring about someone means doing what's best for them, even when it hurts. That's more kindness than I deserve. Carmen watched him walk away, this man who'd given her daughter hope and then shattered it, who'd shown them both what it felt like to be cared for and then revealed it was all built on lies. But as she watched him disappear down the stairs, she realized something that surprised her. Despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the investigation that was coming, part of her still believed he genuinely loved Keisha. The question was whether love built on grief and guilt could ever be enough to overcome the damage it had already caused. Inside the apartment, Keisha was waiting by the door, her new books clutched in her arms. Mama, she said quietly. Mr. David looked very sad. Is he going to be okay? Carmen knelt down to her daughter's level, gathering her courage to break a little girl's heart with the truth. I don't know, baby, she said. But tomorrow, a nice lady is going to come talk to us about Mr. David. She's going to ask us some questions about how we've been spending time together. Are we in trouble? Carmen looked into Keisha's trusting eyes and made a promise she hoped she could keep. No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. But things might be different for a while. Different how? Carmen pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tight against whatever storms were coming. I'll explain everything tomorrow, after we talk to the nice lady. But right now, I need you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you are loved and safe and exactly where you belong. Keisha nodded against her mother's shoulder, though Carmen could feel the questions and fears radiating from her small body. Outside, the afternoon was growing dark, and Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that the real darkness was just beginning. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Janet Torres had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Professional, measured, designed to put people at ease while she catalogued every detail of their lives. She sat in Carmen's small living room, her clipboard balanced on her knees, taking notes that Carmen couldn't read upside down. "Tell me about Mr. Sterling's financial contributions to your household," Janet said, her pen poised above the paper. Carmen glanced at Keisha, who was coloring quietly at the kitchen table, her ears obviously tuned to every word despite her mother's instructions to focus on her artwork. "He bought groceries sometimes," Carmen said carefully. "And he got Keisha some books." "Some books." Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. "According to my information, he purchased a laptop computer, a bicycle, school supplies, and clothing in addition to weekly grocery deliveries totaling approximately $3,000 over 2 months. Carmen felt heat rise in her cheeks. Laid out like that, David's generosity sounded calculated, excessive. He was just being kind. "Ms. Williams, in my experience, when wealthy adults shower gifts on economically disadvantaged children, there's usually an expectation of something in return. Not with David, Mr. Sterling. You're on a first-name basis. We're friends." Janet made another note. Adult men and single mothers often describe these relationships as friendships, yes. "Tell me, did Mr. Sterling ever ask to be alone with Keisha?" "No." The answer came too quickly, too defensive. "He helped with her homework, read her stories. I was always there. Always." Carmen hesitated, remembering the nights David had stayed with Keisha when Carmen worked late shifts, the afternoon he'd taken her to the bookstore alone. "Mostly." More notes. "Did he ever give Keisha gifts without your knowledge?" "Small things. A candy bar from the vending machine at his office building when she visited once. Nothing inappropriate." "He brought your daughter to his workplace?" Carmen realized she was digging herself deeper with every answer. She was curious about what he did. It was educational. "I see." Janet's tone suggested she saw more than Carmen wanted her to. "Ms. Williams, I need you to understand something. Mr. Sterling has a documented history of concerning behavior following his daughter's death. His ex-wife has provided us with medical records showing a psychiatric hospitalization and evidence of previous inappropriate contact with families. That's not, he's getting help now. He's seeing a therapist. Which is commendable. But our concern is whether his relationship with your family represents healthy healing or unhealthy fixation." Janet leaned forward. "I need to ask you directly. Has Mr. Sterling ever made you feel uncomfortable? Has he ever suggested that your relationship might become romantic? Has he ever touched you or Keisha inappropriately?" "No," Carmen said firmly. "Never. He's been nothing but respectful. And yet he's insinuated himself into every aspect of your lives within weeks of meeting you. He's provided substantial financial support, taken on a parental role with your daughter, and according to neighbors, has been here almost daily." Carmen looked over at Keisha, whose crayon had stopped moving. Her daughter was listening to every word, trying to understand why the nice lady was asking scary questions about Mr. David. "He cares about us," Carmen said quietly. "I'm sure he does. But caring can sometimes cross boundaries, especially when grief is involved." Janet closed her folder. "I'll need to interview Keisha separately now. She's 7 years old. She won't understand. Children often understand more than we think, Ms. Williams." 20 minutes later, Janet Torres had filled 3 pages with notes about Keisha's relationship with David Sterling. The little girl had answered every question with innocent honesty that somehow made everything sound worse. Yes, Mr. David bought her presents. Yes, he hugged her goodnight. Yes, he told her she reminded him of someone special. Yes, she loved him like family. After Janet left, Carmen sat on her couch staring at the business card the social worker had given her. The investigation would continue. There would be more interviews, more questions, more people examining their lives under a microscope. Her phone rang. The diner. "Carmen, it's Ray." Her manager's voice was apologetic but firm. "Look, I heard about this investigation thing. Some customers saw that social worker talking to you outside yesterday, and word gets around, you know." Carmen's stomach dropped. Ray. I can't have that kind of attention on my business. I got families eating here, kids coming in after school. If there's some question about inappropriate stuff with children. There isn't. It's all a misunderstanding. Maybe so, but I can't take the chance. I'm gonna have to let you go, Carmen. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Carmen stared at her phone, calculating rapidly. Without the diner job, she'd lost a third of her income. The pharmacy job barely covered rent, and the office cleaning work was only 3 nights a week. They were going to lose the apartment. David Sterling's hands shook as he read the email from his board of directors. The subject line was innocuous enough: Executive Committee Meeting, Urgent. The content was anything but, "David, we need to discuss the recent allegations regarding your personal conduct. The board has concerns about potential liability issues and reputational damage to Sterling Industries. Please attend an emergency meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to address these matters." Marcus knocked on David's office door and entered without waiting for permission. "You saw the email." "They're going to ask me to step down," David said, his voice hollow. "Not step down. Step back. Take a leave of absence until this investigation is resolved." Marcus sat across from David's desk. "It's the smart play, David. If this thing goes public, it's already public. Victoria made sure of that when she called Child Services. Then you need to protect the company. And you need to protect Carmen and Keisha from getting dragged further into this mess." David's phone buzzed. Carmen's name appeared on the screen, and he answered immediately. "Carmen. I lost my job." Her voice was flat, defeated. "The diner fired me because of the investigation. I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next month." David closed his eyes. Everything he tried to do to help was backfiring, creating more problems than it solved. "I can." "No. Don't say you can give me money. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. Then let me help another way. I can get you a job at Sterling Industries. Administrative work, good pay, benefits." "David, are you insane?" Carmen's voice rose. "Do you think giving me a job at your company is going to make this investigation go away? It's going to look exactly like what your ex-wife said, like you're trying to control us, to keep us dependent on you." David hadn't thought of that. He'd only thought about solving Carmen's immediate problem, not about how it would appear to Janet Torres or the board of directors or anyone else watching their every move. "What do you want me to do?" he asked desperately. "Just watch you lose everything because I tried to help?" "I want you to stay away from us," Carmen said, and the words cut through him like glass. "I want you to let us figure this out on our own, the way we were doing before you decided we needed saving." "Carmen. Keisha keeps asking when you're coming back. She doesn't understand why her friend abandoned her. She thinks she did something wrong." The words destroyed him. "Tell her. I've told her everything I can think of. But she's 7, David. She doesn't understand adult complications. She just knows that someone she loved disappeared from her life, and now strangers are asking her scary questions about whether that person hurt her." David could hear Keisha's voice in the background, asking something Carmen couldn't quite muffle. "I have to go," Carmen said. "Please, just give us some space. Let the investigation run its course. Maybe when it's over, we can figure out how to be friends again. And if they decide I'm a threat? If they recommend I never see you again?" Carmen was quiet for so long David thought she'd hung up. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." After she hung up, David sat in his empty office, staring out at the city below. Every decision he'd made with the best of intentions had created new problems. Every attempt to help had caused more harm. Marcus was right. Victoria was right. Even Carmen was right. He was toxic to their lives, no matter how much he loved them. Keisha Williams pressed her face against her bedroom window, watching the street below for a familiar figure that never appeared. It had been a week since Mr. David had come to read her stories, 2 weeks since he'd helped with her math homework, 3 weeks since he'd brought strawberries that looked like hearts. "Mama," she called out, not moving from the window. Is Mr. David sick? Carmen appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion. Between the investigation interviews, the job search, and trying to explain adult complications to a 7-year-old, she looked like she'd aged years in the past month. Why do you ask that, baby? Because you said he went away to get help. When people go away to get help, it's usually because they're sick. Keisha's voice was matter-of-fact, but Carmen could hear the hurt underneath. Grandma went away to get help when she was sick, and she never came back either. Carmen's heart broke a little more. Mr. David isn't sick like Grandma was sick. Then why can't he visit? Why did that lady ask me all those questions about him? Why do you look scared every time I say his name? Carmen sat on Keisha's small bed, searching for words that would make sense to a child when they barely made sense to her. Sometimes adults have problems that are too big for children to understand, she said carefully. Mr. David has some problems he needs to work on, and until he does, it's better if he doesn't visit. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Did you do something wrong? Carmen pulled Keisha onto her lap, holding her tight. I don't think so. But sometimes doing the right thing can look like the wrong thing to other people. That doesn't make sense. I know. A lot of grown-up things don't make sense. Keisha was quiet for a moment, processing this. Mama, are we going to have to move? The question hit Carmen like a physical blow. She'd been so careful not to let Keisha know about their financial problems, but children noticed everything. The unopened bills on the counter, the conversations that stopped when she walked into the room, the way Carmen's face looked when she calculated and recalculated their monthly expenses. I don't know yet, Carmen said honestly. But if we do, we'll figure it out together, okay? Will Mr. David be able to find us if we move? Carmen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible questions and answers she didn't have. I don't know that either, baby. I miss him, Keisha whispered against her mother's shoulder. I know I'm not supposed to say that because he made you sad, but I miss him. You're allowed to miss him, Carmen said, her voice thick with tears she wouldn't let fall. Missing someone doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Outside their window, life in the Riverside district continued its familiar rhythms. Children played in the courtyard, teenagers gathered near the broken streetlight, adults hurried home from work or between the multiple jobs that barely kept families afloat. But inside apartment 2B, a mother and daughter held each other and tried to make sense of how love could cause so much pain, how good intentions could create such devastating consequences, and how the absence of one person could make their small world feel so impossibly empty. The woman standing in David's office doorway looked exactly like the successful psychiatrist she'd become, impeccably dressed, composed, her dark hair pulled back in the kind of perfect chignon that suggested control over every aspect of her life. But her eyes burned with a kind of fury that 3 years of grief could forge into something sharp and cutting. "Hello, David," Victoria said, stepping into his office without invitation. "We need to talk." David looked up from the resignation letter he'd been staring at for the past hour. He'd aged in the weeks since the investigation began, new lines around his eyes, a gauntness to his face that spoke of sleepless nights and meals forgotten in the pursuit of something he could no longer name. Victoria. He didn't stand, didn't offer her a seat. "I thought you'd said everything you needed to say through child services." "Apparently not, since you're still playing house with that family." She moved to his window, looking out at the city below with the same dismissive assessment she'd once turned on their marriage. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Maya's memory?" "Don't." David's voice was low, dangerous. "Don't you dare use Maya to justify what you've done to Carmen and Keisha." Victoria turned, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she looked genuinely surprised. "What I've done? David, you're the one who's been stalking black families, trying to replace our daughter with some project child from the ghetto." "She's not a project. Her name is Keisha, and she's..." "She's what? Your new daughter? Your charity case? Your way of avoiding the fact that Maya is dead and never coming back." Victoria's voice rose with each word. "You've dragged that poor family through an investigation, cost that woman her job, turned that little girl into a pawn in your sick fantasy." "Stop." David stood so abruptly his chair rolled backward. Just stop. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like newspaper articles. Sterling Industries CEO under investigation for inappropriate contact with minor. Tech mogul's suspicious relationship with single mother raises questions. David, this is going national. Your board is in crisis mode, and when reporters start digging into why a wealthy white man was playing benefactor to a poor black family. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You found a little black girl who reminded you of Maya, and you decided she could fill the hole our daughter left behind. Do you think that's what Maya would want? Do you think she'd want you using some other child to avoid grieving for her? The words hit David like physical blows, each one designed to find the places where guilt lived deepest. Because Victoria was right about one thing. He had been avoiding grief, had been using Keisha to feel like a father again instead of facing the fact that his daughter was gone. Maya loved helping people, David said quietly, sinking back into his chair. Even when she was sick, she worried about other kids who didn't have enough to eat. Victoria went very still. What? At the hospital. During chemo. She used to save half her juice boxes for kids whose parents couldn't afford the vending machine snacks. The nurses said she did it every time, even when she could barely keep food down herself. David. She made me promise to always help hungry kids when she got better. Said it wasn't fair that some children had to be hungry when other people had so much food. David's voice broke. I forgot. In all the grief and the guilt and the anger, I forgot that Maya wanted to help children like Keisha. Victoria stared at him, and for a moment, her carefully constructed armor seemed to crack. You never told me that. You left before I could tell you a lot of things. The silence stretched between them, filled with 3 years of unspoken grief and blame and the ghost of a little girl who died believing the world could be better than it was. That doesn't change what you've done, Victoria said finally, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. Maya's compassion doesn't justify your obsession. No, David agreed. It doesn't. But maybe it explains it. Victoria moved away from the window, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked like the woman David had married instead of the stranger she'd become. Do you remember what Maya said the last time we took her to see other kids in the cancer ward? David shook his head. She said watching hungry kids was worse than being sick, because sick kids got medicine and help, but hungry kids just stayed hungry. Victoria's voice grew softer. She asked why grown-ups didn't fix that if it was easier than fixing cancer. The memory hit David like a tsunami. Maya in her hospital gown, clutching a juice box she'd been saving for hours, asking questions that had no good answers. How had he forgotten something so fundamental about who his daughter was? I wasn't trying to replace her, David said. I was trying to honor her. But I lost sight of the difference. Did you? Or did you just find a way to be a father again without dealing with the fact that Maya is gone? Before David could answer, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. David, we have a problem. The story just broke. Channel 7 is running it as their lead at 5 o'clock. Sterling Industries CEO investigated for inappropriate relationship with child. Carmen stared at her phone screen, watching the news story that had turned their private nightmare into public entertainment. The reporter stood outside Sterling Industries' downtown headquarters, her voice pitched with the kind of breathless excitement that came from breaking scandal. Sources close to the investigation tell Channel 7 that Sterling, whose own daughter died in a car accident 3 years ago, has been providing substantial financial support to 7-year-old Keisha Williams and her mother Carmen. Child Services became involved after allegations that Sterling's interest in the family went beyond appropriate charitable giving. Carmen muted the sound, but the images continued. File photos of David in his expensive suits, a distant shot of their apartment building, even a picture of Keisha from her school's website that made Carmen's blood run cold. Mama! Keisha appeared in the living room doorway, still wearing her school clothes. Mrs. Patterson said some people were asking questions about Mr. David today. She said I should come straight home and not talk to any strangers. Carmen's heart sank. The story had reached Keisha's school. How long before it reached her remaining jobs? How long before landlords and employers and everyone else decided the Williams family was too much trouble? Come here, baby. Carmen pulled Keisha onto the couch beside her. We need to talk about some things. Is Mr. David in trouble? Yes. And because we know him, some people think we might be in trouble too. Keisha processed this with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand adult complications. Are we in trouble? I don't think so. But things are going to be different for a while. People might ask you questions about Mr. David, and it's important that you always tell the truth. I always tell the truth. I know you do. Carmen smoothed Keisha's hair, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. And remember, no matter what anyone says on TV or in the newspapers, Mr. David is a good person who made some mistakes. What kind of mistakes? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that love could be selfish? That helping could hurt? That good intentions could create terrible consequences? Sometimes when people are sad, they try to fix their sadness by helping other people. But if they're not careful, their help can cause problems instead of solving them. Is that what Mr. David did? I think so, yes. A knock at the door interrupted them. Carmen peered through the peephole and saw Mrs. Rodriguez standing in the hallway, holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone on a mission. Carmen, Mija, open the door. I brought dinner. Carmen hesitated. Since the investigation began, interactions with neighbors had become strained. Some, like Mrs. Rodriguez, seemed genuinely concerned. Others whispered in corners and looked at Carmen like she was either victim or conspirator, but definitely not just a woman trying to raise her daughter. Mrs. Rodriguez, Carmen said, opening the door. You didn't need to. Nonsense. I saw the news. Terrible thing, making such a spectacle. Mrs. Rodriguez bustled past Carmen into the kitchen, her casserole dish leading the way. That man, Sterling, he helped you see? Bought groceries, helped with the Nina's schoolwork. Yes. And now they say he's some kind of pervert because he helped a black family? Mrs. Rodriguez made a dismissive sound. Ridiculous. If he was a pervert, you think he'd buy milk and vegetables? You think he'd help with homework where everyone could see? Carmen felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so surrounded by suspicion and investigation that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone simply believe her. The whole building knows you're good people, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, heating her casserole on Carmen's small stove. And we know that man, whatever his problems, he helped when you needed help. Now you need help again, and we help each other here. Mrs. Rodriguez. No arguing. Lisa from upstairs is bringing bread. Marcus from the courtyard is collecting money for your rent. We take care of our own. Carmen wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of pride and independence. But Keisha was watching with wide eyes, and the eviction notice was still tucked under a stack of bills on the counter, and sometimes accepting help was the only way to survive. Thank you, Carmen whispered. No thanks needed. But Carmen, Mrs. Rodriguez's voice grew serious. This help, it's different from what that man gave you. We help because you belong here, not because we want something from you. The distinction hit Carmen harder than she'd expected. David's help had felt personal, special, like being chosen. The community's help felt necessary, practical, like being pitted. Both were kindness, but only one allowed her to keep her dignity. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Carmen sat at her kitchen table watching Keisha work on homework that was growing more difficult without David's patient tutoring. Her daughter's grades had slipped from A's to C's in the weeks since the investigation began, another casualty of their fractured world. Mama, Keisha said without looking up from her math worksheet, do you think Mr. David misses us? Carmen looked out the window toward downtown, where David was probably sitting in his office dealing with reporters and board meetings and the destruction of everything he'd built. Yes, baby, she said. I think he misses us very much. Do you miss him? Carmen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a question that had no safe answer. Because the truth was complicated and painful and entirely unsuitable for a 7-year-old's ears. The truth was that she missed David Sterling every single day, missed his laugh and his patience and the way he made Keisha light up with joy. But she also resented him for making their lives into a public spectacle, for loving them in a way that caused more harm than good, for being exactly the kind of help they'd needed and exactly the kind they couldn't afford. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Carmen said finally. "Sometimes you can miss someone and still know it's better that they're not here." Keisha nodded like that made perfect sense, though Carmen suspected her daughter understood the feeling better than the reasoning. Outside their window, the Riverside district continued its evening rhythms, but now Carmen noticed the small clusters of neighbors talking in doorways, the way conversations stopped when certain topics arose, the subtle shift in how people looked at apartment 2B. They were still welcome here, still part of the community. But they were also the family that had gotten tangled up with the rich white man from the news, and that designation would follow them long after the investigation ended. Carmen pulled out her phone and stared at David's number, wondering if he was looking at his phone too, wondering if there were words that could bridge the gap between intention and impact, between love and harm, between the help they'd needed and the trouble it had caused. But in the end, she put the phone away without calling. Some distances were too great for words to cross. Dr. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like David had expected. No diplomas covering the walls, no leather couch from therapy cliches, just comfortable chairs facing each other across a small table that held tissues and a simple lamp. The psychiatrist herself was younger than he'd anticipated, with kind eyes that seemed to see through his careful composure to the broken man beneath. "Tell me about the first time you saw Keisha," Dr. Chen said, settling into her chair with the patience of someone who'd heard 1,000 stories of human pain. David had been coming here twice a week for a month now, each session peeling back another layer of self-deception. Today felt different, heavier, more consequential. "I saw her through the market window 3 weeks before she ever came inside," he began, the words coming easier now that he'd stopped fighting them. "She was pressed against the glass, watching people buy food with this expression of resigned longing. Like she'd already accepted she couldn't have what everyone else took for granted." "And what did you feel when you saw her?" "Recognition." David paused, searching for honesty. "She looked exactly how I felt, hungry for something she couldn't have, isolated from the abundance around her." "You felt she was hungry for food. What were you hungry for?" The question hit deeper than Dr. Chen's usual gentle probing. "Purpose, I think. Maya's death left me feeling useless. Like everything I'd built, the company, the success, it was all meaningless if I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most." "So when you saw Keisha?" "I saw someone I could save. Someone I could protect in a way I'd failed to protect Maya." David's voice grew quieter. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. "Tell me about the more." David was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight. "I loved her. Not as a replacement for Maya, but as herself. Keisha Williams, this brilliant, serious little girl who promised to pay debts when she grew up, who worried about stray cats, who organized her books like tiny libraries." His voice broke slightly. "I loved Carmen too. Her strength, her pride, the way she worked 3 jobs and still made sure Keisha knew she was loved. But you also loved the way they made you feel." "Yes." The admission felt like confession. "They made me feel like a father again. Like I mattered to someone who needed me. And now I understand that needing to be needed isn't the same as love. Real love means doing what's best for someone, even when it costs you everything." Dr. Chen made a note, one of the few she ever took during their sessions. "What would doing what's best for Keisha look like, David?" "Letting her grow up without carrying the weight of my grief. Letting her form her own identity instead of trying to shape her into Maya's memory." David met the therapist's eyes. "Stepping back so she can have a normal life. And yet you still want to help." "I do. But I'm learning the difference between helping someone and helping myself feel better about someone." Dr. Chen smiled, the first real smile David had seen from her in all their sessions. "That's the most important distinction you'll ever make." The eviction notice was pink this time, as if the color might soften the message that Carmen and Keisha had exactly 14 days to vacate apartment 2B. Carmen sat at her kitchen table, staring at the document while Keisha ate cereal for dinner, again, because cereal was cheap and filling and didn't require much creativity. "Mama," Keisha said, not looking up from her bowl, "are we really going to be homeless?" The question hit Carmen like a physical blow. She'd been so careful to shield Keisha from their financial crisis, but 7-year-olds noticed everything. The unopened bills, the whispered phone conversations, the way Carmen's face looked when she calculated their remaining money. "I don't know, baby," Carmen said, because lying had become impossible. "I'm trying to figure something out. Could we ask Mr. David for help?" Carmen closed her eyes. It was the question she'd been avoiding for weeks, the solution that felt both inevitable and impossible. "It's complicated, Keisha." "Because of the investigation?" "Because when you accept help from someone, it changes the relationship. And our relationship with Mr. David is already complicated enough." But as Carmen looked around their small apartment, at Keisha's artwork on the refrigerator, at the corner where David used to sit reading bedtime stories, at the life they'd built in this imperfect but beloved space, she realized pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, Carmen wondered if he'd somehow sensed her desperation. "Carmen." His voice was different. Calmer, more thoughtful. "I know I'm not supposed to call, but I heard about the eviction notice." "How did you?" "Never mind. I don't want to know. I want to help. But I want to do it the right way this time." Carmen looked at Keisha, who was listening with the careful attention of a child who understood that adult conversations determined her fate. "What does the right way look like, David?" "A loan. Market-rate interest, formal paperwork, monthly payments you can afford. You keep your dignity, I keep my distance, and Keisha keeps her home." The offer was exactly what Carmen needed and nothing like what she wanted. No personal connection, no family dinners, no bedtime stories. Just a business transaction that would solve their immediate crisis while maintaining the boundaries everyone insisted were necessary. "I can't promise when I'll be able to pay you back," Carmen said quietly. "Take as long as you need." "But Carmen, there's something else." Carmen braced herself for complications, for strings attached that would undermine the clean simplicity of his offer. "I've established a scholarship fund. The Maya Sterling Educational Foundation. It provides financial support for children who show academic promise but face economic barriers." David's voice grew softer. "Keisha is our first recipient." "David, it's not personal charity. It's an institutional program with an application process and oversight committee. Keisha qualified based on her grades and her teacher's recommendation. The scholarship covers tutoring, school supplies, extracurricular activities, everything she needs to reach her potential." Carmen felt tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spill over. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Maya wanted to help hungry kids, and Keisha deserves every opportunity to succeed. Because love doesn't have to be possessive to be real." David paused. "And because stepping back doesn't mean stepping away completely. It just means stepping back far enough for Keisha to grow into herself instead of growing into my expectations." The Maya Sterling Educational Foundation occupied a modest office in downtown's nonprofit district, far from Sterling Industries' gleaming headquarters. David stood at the window, watching children walk to school, carrying backpacks and dreams and futures that stretched beyond their current circumstances. Marcus knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 20 years of friendship and business partnership. "The first quarterly report," Marcus said, placing a folder on David's desk. 12 scholarship recipients, all performing above grade level. The tutoring program is exceeding expectations, and 3 universities have agreed to provide automatic admission consideration for foundation graduates. David nodded but didn't move from the window. "How's Keisha doing?" "Top of her class again. Her tutor says she's reading at a 5th grade level." Marcus joined David at the window. "You know you can't keep tabs on her forever." "I'm not keeping tabs. I'm reviewing program outcomes." "David." "Fine. I'm keeping tabs. But from a distance. Through official channels. Like a healthy person would." Marcus smiled. "Progress. Dr. Chen says healing isn't linear. Some days I accept that Maya is gone and Keisha is her own person. Other days I want to drive to Riverside District and see how she's doing in person." "And what stops you?" "The understanding that what I want and what she needs aren't the same thing." David turned from the window. Maya would have been 9 last month. I used to think that meant Keisha should be growing into who Maya would have been. Now I realize it means Keisha should be growing into who Keisha is meant to become. That's very philosophical. That's very expensive therapy. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around them. David had stepped back as CEO of Sterling Industries, taking an advisory role that allowed him to focus on the foundation and his own healing. The company's stock had recovered from the scandal. The investigation had been quietly closed when Janet Torres concluded that David's relationship with the Williams family, while unusual, showed no evidence of inappropriate conduct. Life had returned to something resembling normal for everyone except David, who was learning that normal was a luxury he could no longer take for granted. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Carmen sent this." David recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, precise letters that spoke of education hard-won and pride carefully maintained. Inside was a check for $50 and a note that made his chest tight. "David, first payment on the loan, plus interest as calculated. Keisha made honor roll again and says to tell you the strawberries from the Foundation's community garden taste like hearts. Thank you for helping in a way that lets us help ourselves. Carmen." David held the check for a long moment, then walked to his desk and opened the Foundation's accounting file. $50 wouldn't make a dent in what Carmen owed, but it represented something more valuable than money. It represented her agency, her dignity, her right to be a partner in her own rescue rather than a recipient of his charity. He endorsed the check and added it to the Foundation's general fund, where it would help other families find their footing while maintaining their pride. Dr. Chen was right, David said, filing Carmen's note in the folder he'd never admit to keeping. The most important distinction is between helping someone and helping yourself feel better about someone. "And which are you doing now?" David looked out at the city again, thinking about a little girl who was learning to read chapter books and solve multiplication problems and dream bigger than her circumstances had once allowed. A little girl who was growing into her own future instead of carrying the weight of his past. "For the first time in 3 years," David said, "I think I'm actually helping." Outside, children continued their journey to school, each carrying their own stories of struggle and hope. Some would need help along the way: tutoring, scholarships, community gardens that grew strawberries shaped like hearts. Some would provide that help to others when their time came. And in the space between needing and giving, between loving and letting go, between grief and healing, David Sterling was finally learning the difference between replacement and redemption. It would take time, months, maybe years, before he could think of Maya without pain, before he could see Keisha's success as separate from his own needs, before he could love without trying to possess. But for now, it was enough to know that somewhere across town, a brilliant little girl was reading books and solving problems and growing into exactly who she was meant to be. And that was a kind of fatherhood too. Distant but genuine, protective but not possessive, loving in a way that created space for growth instead of demanding gratitude in return. It wasn't the family David had lost, and it wasn't the family he'd tried to build from his grief. But it might just be the family his healing heart could finally, properly love. 5 years later. The Maya Sterling Educational Foundation's annual scholarship ceremony filled the downtown community center with the kind of nervous energy that came from families dressed in their best clothes, celebrating achievements that had once seemed impossible. Carmen Williams Rodriguez sat in the third row, watching 12-year-old Keisha fidget with her acceptance speech, and marveled at how much everything had changed. Their small house in Riverside District, 3 bedrooms, a real yard, neighbors who become friends, still felt like a dream sometimes. Carmen touched the nursing pin on her cardigan, remembering the day she'd graduated from the program funded by an anonymous scholarship that everyone pretended wasn't connected to David Sterling. 5 years of studying while working, 5 years of proving to herself that she could build something lasting, something earned. "Mom, I'm nervous," Keisha whispered, clutching her speech papers. At 12, she'd grown tall and serious, her childhood roundness giving way to the angles of adolescence. But her eyes still held that same careful intelligence that had once promised to pay debts when she grew up. "You'll be fine, Mija," Carmen said, using the endearment she'd learned from Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd become surrogate grandmother to them both. "Just remember what we practiced." Carmen looked around the room and saw other families like theirs, parents who worked multiple jobs, children whose potential had been unlocked by opportunity and support. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, serving over 200 students now. David had created something beautiful from his broken heart, and that beauty had rippled outward in ways none of them could have imagined. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Foundation's director announced, "please welcome our keynote speaker, David Sterling." Carmen felt her breath catch, the way it always did when she saw him unexpectedly. 5 years had been kind to David. He looked healthier, more peaceful, the sharp edges of grief softened into something that resembled contentment. The woman beside him was clearly pregnant, her hand resting on her rounded belly with the unconscious protection of expectant mothers everywhere. David stepped to the podium, and his eyes found Carmen's across the room. He smiled, not the desperate, hungry smile of those early days, but something warm and genuine and appropriately distant. "5 years ago," David began, "I thought I understood what it meant to help someone. I thought love meant holding on, that caring meant controlling, that the best way to honor loss was to try to replace what was gone." His voice carried easily through the room, confident but not arrogant, shaped by years of therapy and self-reflection. "I was wrong about all of that. But this room, these families, these children, you've taught me what helping actually looks like. It looks like stepping back so someone else can step forward. It looks like providing tools instead of answers, opportunities instead of solutions." Carmen watched Keisha listen with the intensity she brought to everything important. Her daughter understood more about their history with David than Carmen had ever directly explained. Not the investigation or the scandal, but the complicated truth that sometimes good people made mistakes while trying to do good things. "Maya Sterling would have been 14 this year," David continued, and Carmen saw him glance toward his pregnant wife, saw her encouraging nod. "She wanted to help hungry children, and in her honor, we've created something that does exactly that, not by feeding them once, but by nourishing their minds and dreams and futures." The applause was warm, genuine, free of the pity or suspicion that had once followed mentions of David's involvement with families like Carmen's. "Now I'd like to call our scholarship recipients to the stage, starting with our very first scholar, Keisha Williams Rodriguez." Carmen's heart swelled as Keisha walked confidently to the podium. Her daughter had taken Carmen's married name when she'd wed Roberto Rodriguez 2 years earlier, a quiet man who worked construction and loved them both with the steady devotion Carmen had learned to value above grand gestures. "5 years ago," Keisha said, her young voice clear and strong, "I met Mr. Sterling in a grocery store when I was 7 years old and hungry. I asked him for milk and promised to pay him back when I grew up." The audience chuckled, and Carmen saw David's eyes grow bright with unshed tears. "I didn't understand then how complicated helping can be, or how much courage it takes to accept help with dignity. I didn't understand that the best kind of love sometimes means letting go." Keisha paused, looking directly at David. "But I'm 12 now, which is practically grown up, and I understand a lot more about promises and payback and what it really means to help someone." Keisha reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. "Mr. Sterling, I promised I'd pay you back when I grew up. This is just the first installment." The room went completely silent. Carmen felt tears streaming down her face as she watched David walk to the edge of the stage, his composure finally cracking. "Keisha, you don't owe me anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," Keisha replied, still holding out the money. "That's what makes it a real gift instead of a debt. You helped me when I was hungry, not just for food, but for books and dreams and someone who believed I was smart. Now I want to help other kids the same way." David accepted the $5 with the solemnity of someone receiving something infinitely precious. "What should I do with this?" he asked. "Put it in the foundation fund," Keisha said without hesitation. "So it can help the next kid who needs milk and promises to pay it back someday." David folded the bill carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I will. Thank you, Keisha. Thank you for teaching me that growing up means learning the difference between what you want and what someone needs." Carmen watched this exchange, her daughter and the man who'd once tried to save her for all the wrong reasons now understanding each other with perfect clarity, and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for 5 years. After the ceremony, families mingled over cake and punch, children showing off certificates while parents planned futures that had once seemed impossible. Carmen found herself standing near the refreshment table when David approached, his wife beside him. "Carmen," he said, and she was struck again by how much gentler he seemed. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Elena. Elena, this is Carmen Williams Rodriguez." Elena was younger than Carmen had expected, with kind eyes and an easy smile that suggested she knew the whole complicated history and had made peace with it. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," Elena said. "David talks about Keisha's accomplishments all the time. You should be very proud." "I am," Carmen said, glancing across the room where Keisha was talking animatedly with other scholarship recipients. "She's grown into someone I couldn't have imagined when she was 7. "We all have," David said quietly. The three of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue around them. Carmen noticed how David's hand rested protectively on Elena's back, how his eyes followed his wife's movements with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to take love for granted. "When is your baby due?" Carmen asked. 6 weeks, Elena said, her hand moving to her belly. "A little girl. We're naming her Maya Rose." Carmen's breath caught. "That's beautiful." David was worried about using Maya's name again, Elena said, looking at her husband with gentle understanding. "But I told him the best way to honor a child who wanted to help others is to raise another child who will carry that same spirit forward." David nodded, and Carmen could see the years of therapy and healing in his acceptance of his wife's wisdom. "Keisha's speech was remarkable," David said, changing the subject with the careful practice of someone who'd learned his emotional limits. "She's going to do incredible things." "She already is," Carmen replied. "She tutors younger kids now, helps them with homework the way you used to help her. She says she wants to be a teacher so she can help children learn to help themselves." "That sounds like something Maya would have wanted to do," Elena said softly. "It sounds like something Keisha wants to do," David corrected gently, and Carmen heard in his voice the man he'd become, someone who could honor his lost daughter's memory without projecting it onto living children. Roberto appeared at Carmen's side, their 2-year-old son perched on his shoulders. Little Miguel looked nothing like Maya or Keisha. He was all Rodriguez, with dark hair and mischievous eyes and the kind of boundless energy that came from being completely secure in his place in the world. "Mijo, come down and say hello," Carmen said, and Roberto swung the toddler down with practiced ease. "This is Miguel," Carmen said to David and Elena. "Miguel, can you say hello to Mr. and Mrs. Sterling?" Miguel hid behind Roberto's legs, suddenly shy, and David knelt down to the little boy's level. "Hello, Miguel," David said gently. "I'm a friend of your sister's." "Keisha's smart," Miguel announced, his shyness evaporating. "She reads me stories about pigs and spiders." "Charlotte's Web?" David asked, and Carmen felt her heart squeeze at the memory. "That's the one," Roberto said, his arm slipping around Carmen's waist. "She says it's about friendship across differences." David stood up, and Carmen saw him taking in this picture. Carmen with her steady husband and secure son, surrounded by the life she'd built through her own hard work and determination. This was what healthy helping looked like. Support that created space for growth instead of dependence, love that celebrated autonomy instead of demanding gratitude. "I should let you get back to your family," David said, and Carmen heard in his voice not the desperate clinging of 5 years ago, but the respectful distance of someone who understood boundaries. "David," Carmen said as he turned to go. "Thank you. For everything. But especially for learning how to let go." He smiled, that peaceful smile that had replaced his hungry desperation. "Thank you for teaching me the difference between helping and healing." As David and Elena walked away, Elena's hand tucked into the crook of his arm, Carmen felt Roberto's presence solid and warm beside her. This was her family now, built on friendship and mutual respect, and the kind of love that grew stronger through shared responsibility rather than dramatic rescue. But David had been part of their story too, and his part had been necessary even when it was complicated. He'd shown Keisha that she was worth helping, had opened doors that might have remained forever closed, had given them both a glimpse of possibilities that had seemed impossible from their apartment in Riverside District. "Ready to go home?" Roberto asked, lifting Miguel back onto his shoulders. Carmen looked around the room one more time, at the families celebrating new opportunities, at the children clutching certificates that represented futures bright with potential, at Keisha still talking excitedly with her peers about projects and dreams and the kind of ambitions that came from knowing the world was bigger than your circumstances. "Yes," Carmen said, taking Roberto's free hand. "Let's go home." As they walked toward the exit, Keisha caught up with them, still glowing from the ceremony. "Mom, did you see?" Mr. Sterling kept my $5. He's going to put it in the fund. I saw, Mija. I'm proud of you. Do you think I did the right thing? Giving him money instead of just saying thank you. Carmen considered the question. This daughter who'd learned to think deeply about the complexities of human connection, who understood at 12 what many adults never figured out. I think you showed him what you learned from everything that happened when you were little, Carmen said. That real generosity isn't about replacing what's lost. It's about nurturing what can grow. Keisha nodded seriously, then brightened as they reached their car. Can we stop for ice cream on the way home? I want to celebrate with strawberry. Carmen laughed, remembering a 7-year-old who'd thought strawberries looked like hearts. Of course we can. As Roberto started the car and Miguel chattered about the pretty decorations and Keisha planned her next tutoring session, Carmen realized that the best gift David Sterling had given them wasn't money or opportunities, or even the foundation that continued to change lives. It was the lesson that love, real love, created space for people to become who they were meant to be, not who someone else needed them to be. And in that space, Keisha Williams Rodriguez was growing into someone remarkable, not because she'd been saved, but because she'd been supported. Not because she'd replaced someone else's loss, but because she'd been valued for exactly who she was. As they drove through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, toward the house they'd made home through their own efforts and dreams, Carmen understood that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of growth. Not the forgetting of pain, but the transformation of it into something that could nourish rather than consume. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to see that transformation happen not just in yourself, but in the people whose lives had intersected with yours in complicated, necessary, ultimately beautiful ways. The $5 bill would go into the foundation fund, where it would help another child discover their potential. But the lesson it represented, that true generosity flows both ways, that growing up means learning to give as well as receive, that love is something you do rather than something you need, that lesson would ripple outward in ways none of them could fully measure. And that, Carmen thought as she watched her family in the rearview mirror, was the most valuable gift of all. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like, and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.